Hey guys, welcome back to another video from MTX Audio. Today, we're going to walk you through installing our all-new audio solution for this X3 behind me, so stay tuned. Hey guys, let me introduce you to our new Thunder 3 kit for the X3 behind me. This is the entire kit as you will get it. It's really simple to install, looks a little intimidating, but it's not. We're going to walk you through it. But first, I want to show you a few of the components. First off, our 12-inch high output subwoofer is going to mount under your seat, the two amplifiers that come with the kit, the wiring harnesses you'll need, as well as the amp rack, the head unit, the RGB controller for your blinky lights, you got to have that, the head unit mounting shrouds, your pair of kick panels. These are sealed, rotationally molded, just like the subwoofer, and then all the mounting brackets. But the first thing we need to do is we need to get some tools and start the disassembly process. To start the disassembly process, we need to remove the seats. We need to remove the two 13mm bolts in the front, as well as the two 19mm flange nuts in the rear. Once the hardware is removed, we can go ahead and undo the seat belts. On a side note, when you're undoing the driver's seat belt, make sure you unplug the speed sensor plug. Now that we have the seats out, it gained access to the battery. We want to go ahead and unhook the negative terminal to avoid any problems down the road. Now that we've got the battery unhooked, we're going to go ahead and remove both the passenger and driver side plastic panels from the side of the center console. Okay, now that we've finished the center console removal, we want to move to the upper driver side dash panel. To do this, we're going to need to take out 7 T30 Torx and the two push pins in the center, as well as any switches you may have installed. Before removing the driver's side panel from the car, you're going to need to unplug your suspension computer. Take careful note because the retaining clip is quite fragile. Alright, now that we've got the driver's side removed, let's move over to the passenger's upper panel. We're going to also be removing the 5 T30 Torx along with the two push pins in the center console. But a special note on this one, keep in mind, one of them has a 10mm nut on the back hidden behind the gas cap cover. Alright, now that we've disassembled the uppers, we want to go ahead and start to remove the fenders. On the driver's side, we're going to be removing 9 T30 Torx. They run all the way up the inside of the fender. There's two on the front, one here, and one hidden up here. Keep in mind, these have 10mm nuts on the back of them, and then the last one is right inside the kick panel. Now that you've got all your hardware removed, you're going to need to remove 2 retaining clips on the top inside part of your fender well. With the clips removed, lift up on the hood panel, pulling your fender back and out as you do so. With the outer fender off, you'll notice that your inner kick panel is loose. You can go ahead and remove that from the car. All right, now that we've got the driver's side fender removed, we're going to go ahead and do the passenger side. This fender is the same hardware we just took off over there with the addition of the fuel filler neck, which we'll get back to here in a second. First, we're going to go ahead and get all the hardware out. Okay, so this fender removes the exact same way as the other one, except for the fuel filler neck. What we like to do is take the top hose clamp off and leaving this rubber piece here so that you have enough material to get a plastic bag over that and seal it so you're not smelling the fumes as you're working on the car the rest of the way. And last but not least, you'll need to remove the fuse cover. Now that we've got the vehicle disassembled, we can go ahead and install our wire harness. What we've got to do is run our power and ground, our head unit power and ground as well as its remote turn on, RGB controller, and rear subwoofer wires. Before we do that, there's a few things we have to prep before we can get these in the vehicle. All right, if you're going to use the RGB included with your kit, you're going to need to connect it to the power harness. Now the power harness is included in your kick panel packaging along with its hardware and 2 seal and solder connectors. You're going to need to connect that to the RGB controller. We simply do that by sliding this together and heating it. Now I use a butane torch, but you can use a heat gun, a cigarette lighter, or whatever you may have that conducts some sort of heat. There we go, there's one of them. And the other, and this is ready to install. All right, now it's time to install our head unit harness. In order to do that, we're going to need to drill a 1-inch hole in the very top of the dash. Now we include the hole saw in the kick panel box. If you don't want to drill a hole in the top of your dash, you can remove the cigarette lighter, which is quite difficult to do. But either way, it's going to be covered by the head unit shroud. Also, before you drill anywhere on any vehicle, check underneath and make sure there's no wires. We recommend that you drill your hole in the center where the texture stops and the smooth slope part begins. To route the power wire, we like to start at the battery, leaving just the pigtail of the fuse holder and the ground outside the center console. Run it forward, zip tying it along the way, up through the center of the dash towards the left front corner of the vehicle. That's where the amp rack's going to be located. The RGB wire, we like to start at the distribution block in the center of the center console, again following the power wire up to the left front corner of the vehicle. For the head unit, we want to run the power and ground down from the top to the distribution center where the RGB is, and then run the blue wire over to the left front corner of the vehicle where the amplifiers will be. For the subwoofer wire, start at the back of the vehicle running the single plug end on the driver's side through the center console up to the left front corner of the vehicle. All right, now that we've got our harnesses ran, it's time to move on to the amp rack. The amp rack is made up of just a few simple components. Your main mounting plate, its lower mounting clamps, a small pad to keep it from resonating against the vehicle, and then your amplifier mounting hardware. But what is important about this is the orientation of the plate. This needs to go in the vehicle. So this would be the left front corner. This is the top. This is a slot that you need to slide into the plastic bracing in the dashboard, which we'll show you how to do in a second. The amps only go on one way. You're going to put your 600 on top with your gain to the curved side. And same with the 400. So we're gonna go ahead and get those mounted so you can see what it looks like. Yep. Before we mount our amplifiers, we can go ahead and remove the plugs because we're not gonna need them because this kit is plug and play with its own harnesses. Set them aside. And remember, when you're mounting your amps, you always want your gain side towards this curve. That way you can access them while they're in the vehicle. Okay, just a couple more things to do before we can put the amp in the car. First thing is we want to apply our compression pad to the right side tab on the amp rack. This will be the right side when you're looking directly at the amps. This is the only single tab on this amp rack. The reason we're doing this is because the left side, which is the pinch, this one is actually going to go behind and press against the plastic flange in the car, create tension and lock it in there. All right, now what we want to do is do a real quick preset on the gains. This is just to get the car playing. You can go back and do your fine tuning later. All right, we're going to want to make sure our input level is set to low. We're going to go ahead and set our gain at about 2 to 3 o'clock. We're not going to use any bass boost. The low pass frequency we want to set about 12 o'clock. Moving to the 4 channel. The front crossover, that should be on 80 Hertz. Front level should be about 2 o'clock. Rear level about 2 o'clock. And the rear crossover on high. That should get your presets done. And the last thing we need to do is get our bar clamps mounted inside the car. They're going to go on the passenger compartment chassis too. When they're in the car and mounted, they're going to go just like this, and we'll show you how to do it. All right, now it's time to move on to the source unit. First thing we got to do is mount the source unit in the shroud. Your shroud will come with all the hardware to do this and the hardware to mount the shroud to the vehicle. We have an upper pressure plate, the 2 lower screws that we're going to use to mount the radio. First thing we need to do is loosely get the pressure plate mounted inside the shroud. To do that, you're going to need to locate the 2 screw standoffs on the very bottom, which is actually the top, and loosely mount the 2.5 millimeter screws into the standoffs. You want to make sure the pressure plate can slide back and forth, and we'll tighten that up later. Before we can install the radio, we have to remove the long studs off the back of the radio. Next, to install the radio in the shroud, we're going to pull the pressure plate back, insert the top of the radio into the bottom of the shroud, sliding the top, or bottom in this case, forward. Using the longer of the 2.5 millimeter screws, we're going to screw the radio into the standoffs on the shroud. Now that we've got the bottom screws tight, we're going to go ahead and slide the pressure plate forward and tighten that down. Okay, at this point we're going to go ahead and connect our amplifier inputs to our head unit. They'll all be labeled front, rear, and subwoofer. From the head unit, you're only going to plug in the front and the rear RCA cables. This is also the time you would run any other auxiliary inputs or USB inputs that you want in your vehicle. Now that the input cable is installed, we can go ahead and prep the vehicle for installation. Before we can install the shroud, we need to go ahead and locate the 4 dimples in the top of the center console. Next, using a 1/8 inch drill bit, we're going to just break the surface of those dimples to allow for easier installation of the shroud hardware. Now that you've got your holes drilled, we need to make our radio connections and feed our signal cable, starting with the black end first and the RCA down through the hole you previously had drilled. These need to get routed to the amplifier area. Seat the radio into position, align your holes, and tighten down the 4 screws, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Before you tighten the screws down, make sure all your cables and wires are tucked neatly inside the shroud. Okay, it's time for our lower kick panel pods, but before we do that, I want to show you a few cool items about these things. One, they're going to come to you fully assembled. You don't have to put anything together, there's no running wires, drilling holes, or any of that sort of stuff in these pods. Next, they're going to come with the harness that it's going to include RGB and a connection to uppers if you use them, as well as a lot of hardware. Now the reason for all this hardware is this will allow you to adjust these to perfectly fit your vehicle. So you can pull it tight, there won't be any gaps, which will cut down on any chance of anything rattling in the future. We're also going to give you the hole saw to cut the holes to route your wires and the templates to do so. Now you're going to want to cut these out so that they look something like this, and then once you do this, you can just keep them. You won't need to cut them out again. Since we're starting with the driver's side kick panel and we removed the plastic earlier, we're going to do the work on the bench. After we've got our template cut out, we slide it into place and simply mark our holes with a Sharpie. Now we can go ahead and drill these locations. Now that we've got our holes drilled, we're going to temporarily mount this back into the vehicle. All right, since this driver's side panel is kind of loosey-goosey in here, what I suggest you do is take one of these body bolts that we used from before and just put it back in the bottom corner just to tighten it up so it's not falling out while you're trying to work on it. There you go. Now it will stay in there. Next, you'll notice on the plate, on the mounting plate for the kick panels, you've got your 2 narrower holes and your 2 wider holes. The narrower holes, you can see by what you've drilled, go towards the back. So this is going to sit in like this. So what we need to do is we need to get a clamp here and a clamp here to mount this in there before we can mount the clips. So taking a look at the brackets, you have a through hole and then a threaded back end. You want to make sure, since that block is going to go right there, that you're putting your through hole out. So you're going to go ahead and snap that in. They're tight, but they're supposed to be. And then the opposite on the top. There you go. Next, we're going to loosely install the blocks. Obviously, concave part towards the bar. The longest of the 10mm bolts. You want to snug it up. I mean, you don't need a tool at this point. You want to be able to move it later on. So you just do it as tight as you can. You'll still be able to move it a little. And again, we're going to do the same thing, same block. There is no right or wrong on the blocks. We're going to tighten this down with our fingers. Get position. You can keep these loose. You're gonna be able to move them. So back to that bracket. 2 narrower holes go to the back. Slide that between the post, down like so. The shortest of the bolts, you're gonna screw, again, finger tight, into the bottom of the bracket, or block, I should say. This inside one is tight, but you can get in there. Just get them started. Okay, now slide it until your holes on your bracket are in the center of the holes that you drilled earlier. Now we take our kick panel, get the wires freed up. I should have brought cutters, but I didn't. All right, grab your last 4 3/4 inch 10 millimeters. You can bring this around to the front. Feed your wires through the last remaining hole in the back. Like this. Reaching from the inside, you should be able to line up and see brass inserts from the kick panel. Okay, that's it. Now those are the last ones you installed, but they're going to be the first ones we tighten before we move on to the next step. So you want to press the kick panel against the plastic panel, against the plastics of the vehicle. Tighten these all the way up. I get a little snug, but go till they stop. There is Loctite in there, so they'll stay. All right. Okay, so here's the beauty of this. You can see all the movement in this kick panel. That's the reason those slots are in there. So we can pull this tight to the vehicle and then tighten up these. Right-handed, so this is difficult. Oops. Different tool. Same on the bottom. Actually, a wrench works best in there. By doing it this way, the clamps will align themselves to where you need to tighten them down. not least, this is all snug, so tighten these down out here. Route your wires up to the amplifier location, and then you would just remove the bolt you were using to line everything up with to hold it in there. All right, now you're ready to move on to the passenger side. Since the passenger side panel is currently in the car, we're going to take our passenger side template, line it up, mark it, and drill it. All right, we're on to the subwoofer. Now this is an under-seat 12-inch pre-wired, pre-terminated, rotationally molded enclosure. It's going to downfire in the vehicle so that nothing can collect on the top of your subwoofer. It's going to come with all the appropriate mounting hardware and also the wire harness. Now the wire harness has two connections on the back side of it. So in the future, if you ever wanted to add a second sub, your car's going to be pre-wired for it. And then, as a bonus, in some of the older cars, we noticed that there were some rattles in the skid plate. They just get old, the rivets stretch out. So we've included a drill and tap and 3 bolts to tighten that back up, because the output of this could possibly make it rattle. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start the install. All right, let's go ahead and get our subwoofer installed in the car. There's a few little steps we got to do before we can drop this thing in. First, we want to remove the 10mm bolt that's holding the brake clamp to the inside bracket. Take the bolt, remove the hose clamp as well, set that aside. Vibration tape. This was included in your hardware kit. What we want to do is wrap this around the brake line. This will prevent this brake line from rattling against your subwoofer enclosure. So to do that, it's adhesive on one side. If I had fingernails, I could get the paper off. Okay, got it. Wrap that around there. Doesn't have to be neat, doesn't have to be super tight. There's a channel in the bottom of the enclosure that this will fit into to hold it into place. That's really it. Now, the enclosure. Now this is going to go in nose first. You want to feel underneath it to make sure you've got that cable into the slot, and it'll set right down in there like so. Again, the hardware. Let's get this all started. We're going to go into the bottom hole where you took that brake piece out on both sides, the inside and the outside. There you go. So those are started. And then your rear bracket. This is going to go just like that. And it will get compressed when the seat goes in. You'll notice in some older cars, if you had your seat in the lowest position, sometimes these will actually bend backwards. So this may not line quite up. So you need to bend these back so that they're in the stock position so that everything lines up. It's really simple, a little piece of pipe or a ratchet or something. There we go, everything's in. Go ahead and tighten it all down. One cool thing about this sub box is, regardless of factory seats or aftermarket seats, you'll be able to mount in the lower position of your seat options and still be able to slide it back and forth. There's a few others that you have to lock it into a taller position. Not with this one, because it's such a shallow enclosure. Now, all that's left is to plug it in. On the harness that we ran back earlier, remember there were 2 plugs on it. Basically, at this point, you can just pick one because there is no left and right. Just go ahead and it'll only fit one way. Set it back in the channel where the other wires come through into the center console. And you're done. Other than that, you just put your seat in. All right, time to wire this thing up. It's real simple. Everything is labeled for you and everything has a place to plug in. It won't plug in wrong. So first thing I like to start with is the 400 because it's lower on the amp rack. I don't have to work around the rest of the wires if I did the amp on top. So to start the 400's wiring, you would have noticed this plug. It would have come in your core kit, which is your amplifier mounting plate and hardware for the amps. This is the speaker output for the 4-channel, also your RGB controller. So first thing we want to do is get that plugged in. All right, let's go ahead and plug our RGB in. Don't forget that little guy. Snap. Next, the audio input for the 4-channel. Okay, that's why I like to do that one first because that plugs way down there. So next, we're going to do the remote turn on for this, which will only go on one way, female to male butt. Now we've got all our speaker outputs. So we're going to grab our speaker wire we ran from the other side, plug it into the right, so that's the passenger. Plug the one from the driver into the left. When they snap, you know they're tight. Okay, let's move to the subwoofer amplifier. Subwoofers. Again, we're going to use the audio input, which was on the same audio input as the 4-channel. but they're RCA connections. So plug those in. Plug in the subwoofer connections. Snap. Your remote turn on. And then the power wires to both amplifiers. They're color matched, so yellow to yellow, black to black. And then, one last thing, you're gonna have a 3.5 millimeter plug left over from the 600. This is your external bass control, which would have come with the amplifier. Looks like this. It's a knob to adjust your output. This comes with multiple brackets to mount it in different locations on the vehicle. We're going to use one of the empty knockouts on the upper panel. So at this point, all I want to do is plug this in and leave it right in the vehicle, which we'll get back to it later. Now, you can see all these wires are a mess, but I wouldn't tie them up till you tested everything. And then go ahead and tie it up, pull your excess back into the center console if you want. But other than that, you've wired your car. Now that we've got everything else wrapped up, we want to go ahead and hook up our distribution block and our battery. The distribution block is going to be the head unit and the RGB controller that you ran down. You're going to want to hook those two into accessory. All right, now that we've got all those connections made, we can go ahead and install the fuse, test the system. If everything checks out, we can put this back together, reassemble it. With everything checked out, we're going to start the reassembly process, starting with the fenders. All right, before we go any further, we want to install our EBC into the dash. We've chosen this knockout. I went ahead and drilled a 1/4 inch hole. The stem of the EBC is threaded, so you're just gonna slide it through and tighten the nut, snap it in the dash, and that's it. You also may have noticed this has an extremely long wire. You've got the right one. It's only that way because people mount their amps in all different places, and we have to be able to compensate if someone has it in the back or it's in a car or a boat. So you're just gonna have to tie the excess up under the dash somewhere, but it is the right one. $10mm socket to snug it down. This has to be hand tight. knob back on. There you go. Your EBC is mounted. Alright guys, as you can see, these kits are pretty easy to install. We'd love to hear from you, so if you have any questions or concerns, reach out to us on any of our social media platforms or just give us a call at 1-800-CALL-MTX. Until then, we'll see you on the trails.